You already know what Beelzebub looks like, and the picture is wrong. A fly the size of a man, upright, crowned, with a human face where an insect should be. It was printed in France in 1863. The real road from Philistine god to Lord of the Flies is longer than that, and it runs through 4 separate losses. He is the god a king of Israel trusted more than his own, and asking him one question is what killed the king. He is the one the Testament of Solomon calls the ruler of the demons, fetched in chains and put on a work gang. He is the name the Pharisees threw at Jesus in front of a crowd, and the answer they got is still read out on Sundays. You can take all of that literally, or take none of it, and either way you are in the right place. 4 losses, in order, and the Heretic Codex counts them tonight. The first thing he loses is a temple, not burned, not sacked, simply unrecorded, everywhere on earth except in the writing of the people who hated him. Start in Samaria, in the palace, on an ordinary afternoon. The king of Israel is called Ahaziah. He is young. He has been on the throne about 2 years, and he is the son of Ahab and Jezebel, which in the Hebrew Bible is close to the worst reference a man can carry. And he has an accident. He falls through a lattice in an upper room, and he does not get up again. So he does what a frightened man does. He sends for a second opinion. Go, he tells his messengers, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover of this disease. Read that again with a map in front of you. Ahaziah is the king of Israel, in his own capital city. Ekron is a Philistine town on the coastal plain, and the Philistines are the enemy. So this is a sick man sending a delegation across a border, past the temples of his own nation, to put a medical question to a foreign god. The chapter never explains why. It does not need to. The insult is the entire point. The messengers do not arrive. The chapter has already told you why. 1 verse earlier, an angel of the Lord had said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Get up, go and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria." So the meeting on the road is an ambush, and only one side knows it. A man comes up the track towards them, and the text is in no hurry to say who he is. He asks one question and then answers it himself. Is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore thus saith the Lord, Thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. They turn round. They walk back. The king asks them what the man looked like, and they tell him, a hairy man, with a leather belt around his waist. And Ahaziah says the name out loud, because in that country there is only one person that could be. It is Elijah the Tishbite. There is a whole shelf of this, the banned grimoires, and the spirits somebody once wrote down by name. Make sure to subscribe to the Heretic Codex. And now the part of the chapter nobody quotes. Nothing about the next page reads the way a modern reader expects a prophet story to read. Ahaziah sends a captain and 50 men up the hill to bring Elijah in. Fire comes down and takes all 51 of them. He sends another 50, the same. Why he sent the second company, the chapter does not say, and it does not seem to think the question is interesting. The third captain climbs the hill and goes down on his knees and asks for his own life and the lives of his men, and Elijah walks down with him. Then the king dies in the bed, exactly as the sentence said. That is the whole biblical career of Baal-zebub. One chapter, one consultation that never arrived, and not another word about the god of Ekron. He is not in a psalm, he is not named in any prophet's oracle. He does not appear in the long lists of foreign gods that the Hebrew writers clearly enjoyed compiling. He turns up once, as the reason a king is going to die, and then that library is finished with him for good. Which leaves a question worth holding on to, because the answer decides what kind of thing this name is. If there was a god at Ekron called Lord of the Flies, then somebody at Ekron should have written it down. Somebody did. Ekron is real, and where it stood is not in dispute. It is one of the 5 Philistine cities, the smallest of them and the furthest north, and it lies under a mound called Tel Miqne, a morning's drive from Jerusalem. Trude Dothan and Seymour Gittin spent 15 seasons taking it apart, which is most of a working life to give to one hill. What they found was not a village. In its earliest Philistine layers, the place looks Aegean rather than Canaanite. The pottery is the wrong shape for the region, and the right shape for the Greek islands. The houses have open hearths in the middle of the floor, which nobody local built. The loom weights are the wrong kind. Whoever these people were, they arrived from somewhere across the sea, and they kept their kitchens. By the 7th century before Christ, the place had become a factory. The excavators counted something like 115 olive oil installations, presses and vats and crushing basins, street after street of them. The largest oil operation anybody has found from the ancient world. That matters for one reason. This was a rich town with something worth protecting, and rich towns write things down. Then, in the last season of the dig, in a temple building near the middle of the town, they turned up a block of stone with 5 lines cut into it. It is a dedication, and it is the kind of find that hardly ever happens. The temple which he built, it says, and then a name, Ikausu son of Padi, and then his father's father, and his father's father's father, an entire royal line of Ekron carved onto one stone. Both of the first 2 kings appear independently in Assyrian records, in the annals of emperors who took tribute off the Philistine coast. That is a rare and unglamorous kind of proof. A city named its own kings, and its enemies' paperwork agrees. The second of those names has a story on it. Padi was Assyria's man in Ekron until his own nobles, tired of paying tribute, put their king in irons and shipped him to Jerusalem, to Hezekiah, for safekeeping. Sennacherib came down the coast, took the town, and got him back. So the man whose son dedicated this temple had spent part of his reign as a prisoner of the king of Judah, which is the sort of neighbor Ekron was. The name Ikausu is its own small argument. It looks like Achish, which is what the Hebrew Bible calls a Philistine king of Gath in the stories about David, and some scholars think both are related to a word that means something like Greek. If that holds, this royal house was still signing itself with a foreign name 5 centuries after its ancestors came off the boats. And then the block says who the building was for. It was built for a lady, a goddess. Her name is a short row of letters that people have argued about ever since, and no argument has ended. What she is not is a lord of flies. 2 things have to be said about that, and the first one is a limit. One inscription from one building is not a census of a city's gods, and Ekron plainly had more than one. Nobody can say that no shrine in that town ever carried the name. What can be said is narrower, and it still matters. Outside the Hebrew Bible, in the entire surviving record of the ancient Near East, in any language, on stone or clay or papyrus, nobody has yet turned up a god called Baal-zebub. The name lives in exactly one place, and that place is the mouth of an enemy. There is an honest objection to make here, and it deserves airing rather than burying. Flies are not automatically a joke. In the ancient world, they came with rot and with sickness, and a god who kept them off a town would have been worth having. The Greeks had one. At Elis, they sacrificed to a Zeus whose title meant the averter of flies, and there are other gods of the same kind scattered around the Mediterranean. So a lord of the flies could perfectly well be a real title, worn by a real deity, meaning the one who keeps the swarm away from your oil presses. If that is what he was, then nobody insulted anybody, and this episode is a fuss about nothing. That reading has always had defenders, and it cannot be ruled out. What it has to explain is the letter. The second loss is the one that made him, and it is a single letter. The whole of that coast, and the cities north of it, spoke about a god called Baal. That is less a name than a job title. The Lord, the owner, the master of the weather, and therefore the master of whether anybody eats next year. On a coastline that lived or starved on the winter storms, he was the most useful god available, and he was everywhere. For a long time, that god survived only in the writing of people who hated him. That changed when a mound on the Syrian coast was opened in the 1920s and gave up a palace archive, and in it, at last, that god, in the words of the people who actually worshipped him. Among the things it gave us is his standing epithet, ZBL, Prince, Exalted, the Lord of the High Place. Now set the two spellings beside each other. Zebul is prince, Zebub is flies. In the Hebrew script, the distance between them is one consonant, and there is a very old argument, never proved and never gone away, that the Hebrew writers moved it on purpose, that they knew perfectly well the title was prince, wrote flies instead, and let it stand. If that sounds like too much weight on one letter, look at what those same writers do to their own royal family. Saul had a son called Ishbaal, man of the Lord. He appears in the book of Samuel as Ishbosheth. Jonathan's crippled son was Merib-Baal. He appears as Mephibosheth. In both cases, Baal has been lifted out and Bosheth dropped in, and Bosheth is the ordinary Hebrew word for shame. These are not enemies being mocked. These are princes of Israel, in Israel's own official history, renamed after death to keep a syllable out of the text. And the original spellings survive elsewhere in the same library, which is how anybody can watch it being done. Against people who would rename their own dead royalty to avoid saying a word, turning prince into flies is not a stretch. It is a house style. Zebul does not only mean prince, it means the high place, the lofty dwelling, the exalted house. It appears in the Hebrew Bible in the mouth of one particular king at one particular moment. When Solomon finishes the temple and stands in front of it to dedicate it, he says he has built a house for God to live in, and the phrase he uses for that house is Beth Zebul, the exalted house. So the demon's name, read the other way round, is not Lord of the Flies at all. It is Lord of the exalted house. It is the same word Solomon chose for the building he put up. Keep hold of that, because in about 10 minutes, a book is going to put this creature to work, cutting stone for it. There is one more piece of evidence for that reading, and it is sitting in the New Testament in Greek, where anybody can check it in a minute. Open a Greek New Testament at the accusation scenes, and the word is not Beelzebub, it is Beelzebul. There are no flies in it. The flies arrive centuries later, when Jerome makes the Latin Bible and carries the spelling of two kings across into the Gospels, and from the Latin they walk into English and into every horror film since. Most modern translations have quietly put the Greek back. And there is a line in Matthew where Jesus makes a joke that only works one way. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, he says, how much more shall they call them of his household? Master of the house, Lord of the exalted house. The pun is dead in English, and it is alive in Greek, and it tells you what the name meant to the people who were using it. That is where the history runs out, and the demonology starts, and the join is a book about Solomon. The Testament of Solomon is a Greek text, probably assembled in the first few centuries after Christ, and it is the hinge of this whole channel. It is the place where the king who built the temple turns into the king who commanded demons, and it opens, of all places, on a building site. The temple is going up. There is a boy on the workforce, a favorite of Solomon's, and every evening something is taking half his wages and half his food, and drawing the strength out of him through the thumb of his right hand. The boy is wasting where everyone can see it. Solomon prays about it, and the book's own logic answers him. He is the man building God's house, so when he asks for help with the site, he gets it. The archangel Michael comes down with a small ring, a seal cut into a stone, and one instruction: throw it at whatever is taking the boy. It works. The thing at the boy's hand is a spirit called Ornias, and the ring pins him. And then Solomon does what any investigator in any interview room does when he catches somebody small. He sends him for his superior. Take this ring, he tells Ornias. Go to the prince of the demons and bring him here. The name Ornias comes back with is Beelzebul. Orneas does not go free either. Solomon puts him on the stone, cutting for the temple, and the boy on the workforce gets his strength and his wages back and walks out of the book. What follows is an interview, and the book runs it as one. A question, an answer, and a king writing all of it down. Ask him who he is, and the reply is the largest claim in the book. He says he was once the first angel of the first heaven, not a local god of a Philistine oil town, the senior angel of the nearest heaven to God, standing in a room, in chains, in front of a man with a ring. Ask him what he does, and he does not hesitate. I destroy by means of tyrants. I cause the demons to be worshipped alongside men. I arouse desire in holy men and select priests. I bring about jealousies and murders in a country, and I instigate wars. Every item on that list is political. There is no possession in it, no illness, no goat, and no fly. This is a spirit whose specialty is institutions, rulers, priesthoods, nations. It is the most flattering account of Beelzebub that survives anywhere, and the man taking it down was his jailer. Then Solomon asks the question that makes the book worth reading. He asks what stops him. I am frustrated, the demon says, by the holy and precious name of the Almighty God, called by the Hebrews by a row of numbers, of which the sum is 644, and among the Greeks it is Emmanuel. He is not volunteering. The premise of the whole book is that the seal on that ring compels an answer, and this is what compelled looks like. Even so, consider what that sentence is. It is the counter-code to a demon's own defeat, given up in an interview on the record. And the counter-code is not a ritual, it is a name, and it is one that anybody watching this could say out loud with no equipment at all. Solomon does not release him, and he does not bargain. He puts him on the work gang. The ruler of the spirits spends the rest of his appearance cutting stone for the exalted house that carries his own title. That is the high water mark. Everything after it goes the other way. The third loss is the one that cost him everything, and it takes one sentence. Leave the building site. It is now nearly 9 centuries since Ahaziah's messengers turned round on that road, and the place is a crowd in Galilee. A man has been brought to Jesus who can neither see nor speak, and Jesus has cured him, and the crowd is starting to say a dangerous thing out loud. They are asking each other whether this could be the son of David. The Pharisees present need an explanation that is not that one, and they produce one. This fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils. Notice what they assume. They do not explain who Beelzebub is. They do not argue for his existence or for his rank. They use the title the way you would use a job description everybody in earshot already knows, which tells you that in 1st century Galilee, the prince of the demons already had a name, and everybody standing there knew which one. And then comes the answer, and the answer is where he loses the name. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, Jesus says. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? Read the 2 speeches against each other. The accusation says Beelzebub, the reply says Satan. Nobody in the scene marks the change. Nobody objects, and the argument works perfectly, which means both sides are treating those 2 names as one thing. That substitution, made in passing, inside a rebuttal, is the most consequential thing that ever happened to this demon. From that point on, wherever the Christian tradition reaches for a prince of demons, the name that arrives first is Satan. It helps to know that the job was contested. In the centuries either side of this scene, Jewish writers keep appointing a chief of the evil spirits and keep giving him a different name. The Book of Jubilees puts a figure called Mastema at the head of them. The community that hid the Dead Sea Scrolls wrote about Belial and gave him a dominion and an army. The Testament of Solomon says Beelzebul. The Gospels say Satan. 4 books, 4 names, all of them describing the same office inside roughly the same stretch of years. Only one of those names is still in use, and it is Satan. Beelzebub did not lose an argument. He lost a vacancy he had been holding. The scene does not stop there, and the rest of it is worth knowing. Jesus goes on to the image of a strong man's house, which cannot be robbed until somebody ties up the strong man first. Then he says the hardest thing in the Gospels, that every sin will be forgiven except one, and the one is calling the Spirit of God unclean. Mark tells you plainly why he says it, because they said, "He hath an unclean spirit." So the accusation about Beelzebub is the reason the unforgivable sin exists in the text at all. This name is standing next to the harshest sentence Jesus ever passes, and then it drops out of the New Testament entirely. Whether the two were ever separate is not settled, and this channel is not going to pretend that it is. The Testament of Solomon keeps them firmly apart. Its Beelzebub is a fallen angel with his own portfolio, and Satan is somewhere else. Plenty of early Christian writers treat the two as one being and never pause over it. The Gospels themselves can be read either way, and serious people read them both ways. The only thing not in doubt is which name won. After that, he spends 16 centuries being demoted politely. The great English poem about hell seats him second. In the council scene, the fallen powers argue about what to do next, and the argument is a proper debate. Moloch wants open war and does not care how it ends. Belial wants to do nothing and dress the nothing up as prudence. Mammon wants to stop fighting altogether and build an empire in hell out of its own minerals. It is a cabinet meeting, and like every cabinet meeting, it is waiting for the one person whose opinion decides it. Then Beelzebub rises, described like a statesman with the ruin still on him, and puts a different idea on the table. Not heaven, the new world, and the new creature living in it. Strike there, the council takes his plan, and the poem tells you plainly that Satan thought of it first. He is the deputy who says the quiet part out loud. Second in a cabinet is a long way down from prince of all the demons, but it is a dignified fall. The fourth loss is not dignified. In 1863, a Frenchman named Colin de Plancy brought out the illustrated edition of his Dictionary of Demons. His entry restores the rank on paper and calls Beelzebub the chief of the infernal empire. But nobody remembers that book for its text. They remember it for its plates, and the plate beside this entry, cut by an artist called Louis Le Breton, is an enormous fly. Wings, legs, a crown, a face. Every horror poster, every heavy metal sleeve, every internet ranking of demonic nobility descends from that page. A dictionary handed him his rank back, and an illustrator took his body away, and it is the illustrator everybody remembers. The picture is a drawing of a translation of a spelling that may have been an insult in the first place. There is one more stop, and most people have met the name here without knowing it. In 1954, William Golding published a novel about schoolboys on an island, and he took his title straight from this demon. In the book, the thing the boys are afraid of turns out to be a pig's head on a stick, left in a clearing, black with flies. That is the name doing its final job. Not a god, not a prince, not the first angel of the first heaven, a rotting head in the heat, and a lesson about what people are. That is the fourth loss, and it is the one everybody can draw. A storm god, if he ever was a storm god, ends up as an insect with a crown, because a scribe in Jerusalem moved one letter sometime before the exile to Babylon, and a French artist took him literally, roughly 24 centuries later. So count what is left. He has no temple. The one building at Ekron anybody has dug up and read was dedicated to a goddess, and no inscription anywhere carries his name. He has no letter, because the prince became the flies, in the only book that mentions him, written by the people he was worshipped against. He has no name of his own, because one sentence in an argument in Galilee quietly handed the job to Satan, and nobody ever gave it back. And he has no face except an insect's, drawn out of that same old joke by a man illustrating a French reference book. Unless the flies were always his. If a Greek town could keep a god whose job was holding the swarm off the meat, so could a Philistine town that lived on olive oil, and in that case, nothing was ever taken from him here, and the count is 3 rather than 4. That exit stays open, and this channel is not going to close it for the sake of a tidier story. What he does have is the interview. In one Greek text, before all of it, somebody sat him down and asked him what he was, and wrote the answer down without correcting it. He said he had been the first angel of the first heaven. He said he worked through rulers and priests and wars. He said one name stopped him, and then he gave it away. And a king put him on a wall. It is the only place in this entire library where the Lord of the Flies is allowed to speak for himself, and there is not a fly in it. Let me know in the comments, 1 being or 2, because the earliest sources split on Beelzebub and Satan, and the split has never closed. And if you want the catalogue the tradition ended up keeping instead of him, the complete inventory of what the Lesser Key of Solomon says the king bound, and what each spirit was supposed to be good for, that full documentary is up on the channel already. Make sure to subscribe to the Heretic Codex.